I recently went to Hersheypark in August of 2020. I visited the park in 2018 for about half a day, and I really didn't get the full experience. I went back for 2 days in 2020 for Candymonium and the credits I've missed, and I've ridden every coaster in the park except for one. Which is the best coaster in the park, and more importantly, which one is the worst? This is my ranking of the Hersheypark roller coasters. Before we get into the top 10, let's talk about the 4 coasters that didn't make the list. Number 14, Coco Cruiser. This Zamperla gravity coaster isn't the worst kiddie coaster ever. It has some laterals in the helix, which makes it kind of fun. This is a kiddie coaster though, so it is obviously the worst in the park. Number 13, Wildcat. I know this is GCI's first coaster, but how do you mess up this badly? This ride is my second least favorite coaster I have ridden. The drop is okay, but the first valley really shakes everything around. You are just shaking from side to side and then get slammed into the side of your seat at the top of the first turnaround. Basically, every valley is just super painful and everything is forceless. See this airtime hill? Forceless. This turn? Forceless. This twisted airtime hill? Probably the most painful thing on any coaster. You are slammed into the side of your seat, and it might be more painful than T3's restraints. You can even hear my dad's reaction on this POV.
That was rough.
The only good thing about this ride is the brake run. The brake run actually sounds like a seal. This ride is awful, but GCI definitely got better, as you'll see later in the video. Number 12, Wild Mouse. This ride is the only ride I haven't ridden. I decided to include it just because I've ridden the one at Dorney Park, and they are clones. This ride is focused on lateral Gs, but my problem is the seats. These seats are super tight, and the restraints just aren't comfortable. Overall, the entire ride is just uncomfortable. It isn't fun, it's just forceless drops and hills and painful turns. It's a nice family coaster, but nothing more. Number 11, Trailblazer. This ride might be the shortest roller coaster in existence. Let's look at the elements. Drop, turn, helix, brakes. That's it. But in this very short ride experience is a surprisingly fun family coaster. It's not the best Aero Mine Train, but it's definitely not the worst. The ride isn't forceful, but it's actually more of a peaceful experience, which is what mine trains are supposed to be. It's no Adventure Express, but it's a great family coaster and a nice break from the thrilling behemoths of Hersheypark. Let's get into the actual list now. Number 10, Sidewinder. Oh yay, a Boomerang. I've never seen this ride before. Yes, these rides are everywhere, but this one isn't horrible. Yes, these rides are pretty rough, especially that Cobra roll, but they are very intense rides. Riders board the very tight trains, which is my biggest problem with this ride. Yes, the restraints stop headbanging, but they are very constricting, which is ironic for a ride themed to a snake. This ride would have been better if it had lap bars like that one Boomerang in Austria. Riders roll backwards up a hill and drop forwards into a very rough and intense Cobra roll. It's not the roughest thing ever, but it isn't comfortable either. This element does have some great positive Gs though. Following this Cobra roll is a vertical loop before the trains roll backwards down another hill. This vertical loop is a lot better backwards, because the train is hauling through this element. This might be one of the most intense coaster elements I've experienced. Riders go backward through the rough Cobra roll before going back into the station. If this ride just had better restraints, it could have been so much more. Lap bars on Boomerangs, please. Number 9, Super Dooper Looper. Fortunately, this ride was closed this year, so I have to reflect on my 2018 ride. But I remember that this ride is pretty good. First of all, the seats from what I remember are pretty open, which makes this ride better than Sidewinder already. Also, lap bars. This ride has lap bars, which is great. Riders go down the first drop, which is pretty fun for being so small, and enter the best part of the ride. This circular vertical loop is very intense. Circular loops are usually more intense than the typical teardrop-shaped loops, but this loop really surprised me. Following this positive-filled loop is another positive-filled element, a sharp turn. Riders bend upwards before gliding over the midway. This part of the ride is just so much fun. You can look down at the guests walking down the hill, and this part of the ride is just good to put your hands up and feel the wind in your face. It's not intense, but just fun. Riders enter a tight turn through a tunnel and glide through the woods. This part kind of reminds me of the Beast in a way, with riders just in the woods and nothing around them. Riders dive down before entering a lateral filled helix to end the ride. It isn't the most intense thing, but it is a lot better than Sidewinder because of the restraints and smoothness. Overall, this ride is just more fun than Sidewinder. Number 8, Laff Trakk. Laff Trakk is an indoor spinning roller coaster. It isn't intense, doesn't have airtime, doesn't have inversions, but it is just so much fun. I think the theme really adds to it. You really feel like you are in a funhouse. Inside the queue, there are crazy mirrors, black lights, and more. Inside the actual ride, you spin through a giant lady's mouth, past crazy clowns, and it's a very hectic experience. The spinning is just so much fun. You have no idea what direction you are facing, and it is just an out-of-control experience. It is especially fun if you ride with a friend. Everyone is just so confused and laughing the entire ride. The layout is pretty good, especially this overbanked turn, which gives some good negative Gs. Overall, Laff Trakk is a very fun coaster. Number 7, Comet. Comet is a classic wooden coaster that really surprised me. This coaster is pretty old, but it has some great forces. It was also a lot smoother than rides like Racer or Blue Streak. The ride starts with kind of a forceless drop into a positive-filled valley. Following this is a pretty weak floater moment before diving down into another weak floater-filled hill. The ride dives down into a positive-filled valley before flying up into yet another weak floater hill. The ride flies through a lateral-filled turn before diving and finishing with more weak floater hills. Overall, the ride is very fun, but the airtime isn't that great. There is a lot of airtime, but it isn't the best. This is a great ride, and it's definitely fun, but don't go in expecting a ton of forces. Number 6, Lightning Racer. This GCI wooden coaster is a big step up on Wildcat. Unlike Wildcat, this ride is smooth and very forceful. It isn't the smoothest coaster ever. It is definitely smoother than Wildcat. What makes this ride even better is the racing aspect. Sometimes the rides are dueling next to each other, while other times they are coming at each other headfirst. The rides start with 2 great twisted drops before coming into a great floater airtime moment. The rides dive down into a lateral-filled turnaround before entering a shed. Hey, I found what's in the shed! It's Lightning Racer! After this, the ride takes some lateral-filled turns before entering an intense helix where the trains spiral around each other. The ride ends with some airtime moments and more intense turns. Overall, this ride is fantastic and is definitely one of my favorite wooden coasters. It doesn't have the most airtime, but it does have some good moments and it's pretty intense. It's definitely one of the best rides in the park. Number 5, Great Bear. I can describe this ride in one word: intense. This is one of the most intense coasters I've ridden. Not only are there a ton of positive Gs, but all of the elements are extremely whippy. There is no airtime, but the intensity makes up for it. Also, this ride is very, very fun to watch. This might be one of the smoother B&Ms I've ridden. It is very smooth and doesn't really have any headbang. There is a small rattle, but overall it's a very smooth ride. The beginning is kind of weird. Instead of going into a drop right away, it goes through a tight positive-filled helix. Then the ride goes into its big drop. Riders reach the first vertical loop and are pushed hard into their seats. This might be one of the most intense vertical loops I've experienced. After this is another super intense element. This element is an Intamin. What is great about this element is it provides great positive Gs and a very, very whippy transition in one element. The next element has a very whippy transition. It's a 0G roll. It's not as whippy as Raptor's 0G roll, but it is still a very whippy element. Following this is a pretty intense turn before flying into an extremely whippy corkscrew. After this, the ride is done. The ride is very, very short, but it packs a punch, which is why it's at number 5 in the park. Number 4, Fahrenheit. I rode this in the front in 2018 and was pretty impressed, but then I rode it in the back in 2020. This ride in the back is very intense. It also has some great airtime moments. The ride starts with a vertical lift, which is kind of creepy. It feels very weird being on your back on a roller coaster. All you can see is the sun and the sky. This drop provides some great airtime, especially in the back. Entering the Norwegian loop gives a lot of whip before diving down into a positive-filled valley. The train climbs back up and gives a very whippy moment of ejector before diving into a rattly section. This cobra roll is very, very shaky, but it is a cobra roll, and all cobra rolls are shaky. The train dives down into 2 rattly corkscrews before going into a very intense turn and airtime hill. After this airtime hill, the ride is done. This ride is incredible, and it has some great forces, but it's very, very shaky. The shakiness doesn't affect the ride too much, but it is definitely noticeable. This ride is number 4 in the park, which really shows how good Hersheypark's top 3 is. Number 3 is Stormrunner. Unfortunately, this ride was closed this year, but I rode it twice back in 2018, and I still remember how incredible this ride was. Yes, this ride is super short, but it has some great forces and one of the best launches ever. Riders enter the trains and pull down their over-the-shoulder restraint. I never had a problem with these restraints. I know some people have issues with these restraints, but they are very comfortable and eliminate all head banging. Riders hear a voice saying, "Now get ready, here we go." And riders are launched at 70 plus miles per hour in one of the most intense launches I've experienced. The train goes through a positive-filled moment before heading up into a floater-filled top hat. Following this is a massive drop into a positive-filled valley before going up into a cobra loop. Not sure why it is called a cobra loop. It looks like an Immelman to me, Chief. Riders dip down into an insane element, a flying snake dive. The train flies through a heartline roll before diving straight down in another inversion. The train rises up into a rapid transition before flying into the brake run. This ride is very, very short, but it provides one of the most intense ride experiences ever. Overall, this ride is excellent and is very close to being number 2, but I decided that number 2 is Candymonium. I love intensity, but I prefer airtime over intensity. Luckily, this ride has some of the best airtime I've experienced. It's no Voyage or Steel Vengeance, but this has a lot of great floater moments. You should go check out my review of Candymonium. There is a link in the description. Not only is this a pretty long ride, but it has some of the best elements. The first drop provides great floater airtime, and this camelback has some of the great floater as well. The next turn is full of positive G's, and the train hauls through the entire turn. 2 more airtime-filled hills leads into an outer bank turn, which provides a great near miss and sideways airtime. The ride pops up into an airtime hill and a helix around the entrance of the park. This might be the best section of the park, just because of Candymonium wrapping around the Hershey Kiss fountain. Yes, there are only 2 rides in this section, and one's a carousel, but this helix makes up for it. This ride is just so nice to watch. This has the second best elements of any hyper I've ridden. This is why the coaster is number 2 at the park. Number 1 shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. I said I love intensity and airtime, and this ride has both. It's Skyrush. This is my 3rd favorite coaster I've ridden, and for good reason. Yes, this ride is very, very short, but it has some of the strongest airtime I've experienced, along with some insane positive G's. The ride launches you up a 200-foot tall hill in 10 seconds before dropping riders down one of the best drops in the world. You start floating out of your seat like a Millennium Force drop, but then there is a massive jolt that launches riders into their restraints into an ejector airtime moment. A very, very intense turn leads into the best airtime moment I've ever experienced. A wild ejector airtime moment that sends riders flying out of their seats. Some people complain about the restraints, and yes, they do come down during the ride, but it isn't as bad as everyone says. Another very intense turn leads into another very insane ejector airtime moment. There's a lot of ejector airtime moments and positive G's on this ride. Following this hill is a weird overbank turn that provides some sideways airtime. This element leads into a twisted airtime hill. This hill provides some great ejector along with amazing lateral G's. 2 more intense airtime moments lead into the brake run. This ride is short, but it is a rush throughout the entire ride. I can't believe something like this exists. That's how crazy this ride is. This is definitely number 1 in the park. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I have an email, so email me any questions or pictures or stuff like that. My email is in the description down below. I'll see you all next time.